One of the things you said that you learned in your running of political campaigns was how important the sequence was. And I know my students, in reading various accounts of this, looked at how centrally you put the Soviets first and foremost, and nurturing that all the way through, from political isolation to sanctions to force. And then people know about coalition building, which we talked about last time, and the importance of sequence there. And sometimes the normal rules don't seem to apply. For example, get your allies on board first. And yet, if you brought the Israelis on up front, you couldn't do it, at least explicitly, right?
You talking about Madrid?
No, and for the Gulf War, if you said, we want the Israelis on board in the coalition to build the political and military coalition, it'd be very tough to do that.
That's right.
Similarly, if you went to the Congress, the internal negotiation first, and got a no, it'd be really hard to do the external one.
That's correct.
So, you know, some of the rules of thumb, you guys were smart enough to kind of work around. And could you talk a little bit about the sequencing and staging aspects of putting this coalition together?
Okay, I think I mentioned, and I know I mentioned in the first session, that there was a lucky circumstance, quite frankly. Saddam Hussein was a great miscalculator, and he miscalculated badly in this instance. He invaded Kuwait when George Bush was meeting with Margaret Thatcher in Aspen, Colorado, and I was meeting with the Soviet foreign minister in Irkutsk, Siberia. And we took advantage of those things. I told you earlier how this was the beginning of the coalition. Shevardnadze was so embarrassed about the bad advice he got from the KGB, which he relayed to me, that he then agreed to meet me in Moscow and stand up and condemn the invasion. We never had any thought of bringing Israel into the coalition, because we didn't want this to be seen to be a U.S.-Israeli effort against an Arab state. That would have been a counterproductive thing. And in fact, we went to great lengths and many negotiations to convince Israel not to react to the Scuds that were coming in there, to let us deal with it by taking out those batteries in western Iraq, and to refrain from letting the Iraqis particularly say, wait a minute, this is just the United States and the Zionist entity taking on an Arab state. And I must say this, I'd mentioned Prime Minister Shamir earlier, and how while we disagreed on policy, we had a very fine personal relationship. And I want to tell you, it was because of Prime Minister Shamir that Israel stayed out of that war. And had she got into the war, it would have been a very, very serious difficulty for us from the standpoint of continuing to prosecute it. Shamir's defense minister wanted to get into the war. Israel has a record, a very fine record of always taking care of itself, reacting when it's attacked. It was quite a feat, quite frankly, to get Prime Minister Shamir to agree that they would not do this and to let the United States take care of it. With respect to the Soviet Union, it became clear very early on, because we were dealing with a Soviet client state, that we had to have them in the coalition, or there wouldn't be a coalition that could go to the UN Security Council. Now, we would have done this whether we went to the Security Council or not. President Bush felt very strongly, and I did too, that we had the authority under Article 51 of the UN Charter under the self-defense article of the Charter, to kick Iraq out of Kuwait, because the Kuwaitis had come to us, government in exile, and asked us to do it. So we had the legal authority in our view. But we recognized that if we could get a UN resolution, we could portray this for what it was, which was Iraq against the rest of the world. And furthermore, we knew that if we could get a UN Security Council resolution, we might have a better shot with the U.S. Congress. Remember now, we were a Republican administration with a Democratic House of Representatives and a Democratic Senate. And boy, were they unenthusiastic about giving us any help to go start a war in the Middle East. And I never will forget how many times I would go up to testify and I'd be met up there on the Hill with this, Mr. Secretary, how many dead Americans is it worth to do what you're going to do? And by the way, how can we pay for this when we have all of these social obligations here and so forth? So we needed to figure out some way to get the Congress on board. That's the way you get the American people on board. But President Bush would have done this whether we'd gotten an affirmative vote in Congress or not. But having the UN Security Council give us a resolution of force put us in the position of being able to go to a senator and say, Senator, you mean you're not going to support the President of the United States on this, but the President of Ethiopia is supporting it? And it was fairly effective. But even then, we only won the Senate 52-47. Again, this is another instance, I think, where the political experience really helped me. But we would have done it anyway, but it was really important if we could do it to get that UN resolution, and we did. And to do that, we had to sequence. And we did sequence. And we kept the Soviets at the forefront of it because they could, with the use of their veto, we kept the Chinese at the forefront of it too. They were both very lukewarm about the idea, and either one of them could have killed the UN Security Resolution by veto.